Check podcasts.
The Bread and Butter Collective is a collection of hospitality professionals working together to help strengthen our industry to build strong culture, community, and sustainability.
I'm Kalen McNeil.
And I'm Sam Jones. And this is the Bread and Butter Podcast.
Welcome to the Bread and Butter Podcast. Sam, how are you?
Kalen, I'm awesome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Did you have a good week?
I had a great week. I had
What was your highlight?
My highlights were the conversations that I had. I had about 3 really great conversations last week, one of which I think was going to lead to more conversations.
That's what conversation does.
Right. It was great. I got a call to come talk to an old buddy, and we just ended up having such a great time. And just, conversation, communicating with anybody is a real treat. We don't get enough real communication in our lives, and it felt like we were really communicating. Oh, yeah, face-to-face.
Yeah, like actually connecting. Yeah. As people should connect.
Exactly.
Removing the social media and the computer warrior type conversation.
There's no emotion. There's no nuance.
Yeah.
Anymore in conversation. So having real conversations with real people feels like a real good thing to do. How was your week?
My week was good. Yeah. I can't say I did anything, incredible, but yeah, just good.
Well, you were smelling the flowers, not feeding them. That's pretty incredible.
Yes. Spent some time in my yard, which is nice. Yeah. And we've got a couple ponds there, so I scoop out leaves and crap. But hey, we're here to talk about more serious issues.
Well, I know. I see that we're right next to each other on the podcast.
I know.
Studio. That
means we've got a guest.
Oh, it only means one thing. We have a guest. Who's our guest today?
Dave Thompson, who is running for Victoria City Council. Yay. Welcome, Dave. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys. It's really nice to be here.
Yeah.
Good morning.
We're interviewing a few city councilor candidates and getting their perspective on where we've been, what their vision is, and what your vision is moving forward if you get elected. And you're talking about some of the issues dealing with the city. And the Bread and Butter Collective obviously is a hospitality business network. So we have a lot of employees that work with us. Some of the concerns with climate change and housing and just general governance in the city is what I'd kind of like to talk about.
I'm in the same boat. Anytime we get the opportunity to talk to people about policy, I like to keep it steered towards hospitality because that's where our brains are. But yeah. I mean, this is good for the entirety of Victoria. So we'll keep the conversation nice and open for you.
So Dave, why don't you tell our listeners, a little bit about your background and how you found yourself running for city council.
Pretty diverse
background.
Start
with kindergarten, please.
Born and raised in Hamilton, Ontario.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, the Hammer. It was tough times there, but I moved on pretty quickly. My first real big job, I guess, was probably working with the Crown Attorney's Office and the police in Hamilton. I was working for the Ministry of Attorney General. I was an articling student. And,
so you're a lawyer.
Yeah. That's how I started. Don't hold it against me.
No.
And then went back to school a couple times and started working as a prosecutor for the Ministry of Environment in Ontario. Came out to Vancouver, a lot of years ago. Worked for an environmental organization there, conducting environmental litigation, and then went on to sort of nonprofit management, and then got into, about 18 years ago, consulting. So working for different organizations, governments, that sort of thing on a variety of topics. But some of your topics that you're concerned with in Bread and Butter are really interesting to me because I've been involved in these areas for much of my career. And then what drove me to politics is really a concern for my kids in this housing market and in terms of the sort of planetary health as well. and also my concern for the city of Victoria. It's not the housing market, the way things have gone, has not been good for the people of Victoria, probably not good for the businesses of Victoria.
For sure. I mean, that's one thing for us. Sam's got a number of employees. We've got a number of employees, and trying to find, allowing them to be able to live in the communities where they work is very important. And I know not speaking for Sam, but I'm sure he has the same issues with staff just wondering where they're going to live. And we've had staff have to leave the area because they couldn't afford to live or find a spot if they got evicted or their landlord was changing his direction. It affects those issues big time. So.
Yeah, you guys were talking about having good conversations, and I've had like hundreds of conversations, and they often come back to this, and people are actually saying, I'm leaving because I can't find suitable accommodation for my growing family.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have to leave Victoria. And one of my nieces actually left just because she couldn't find a place.
Well, it's horrible I don't think we need to go into the details of why it's bad, because I think it's pretty obvious. But when you can't, I know we've shut down Cook Street at lunch because we don't have staff during the day. So we open in the evenings on Mondays and Tuesdays. And I don't know how long, that was supposed to be a temporary 1 week thing. But this is our third week that we're having to close, and we still haven't been able to find employees.
Wow.
And it's housing is probably one of the leading reasons, I would think.
So for those who don't live in Victoria, who don't know where Cook Street Village is and why that might be a problem, Cook Street Village is a really trendy part of town. Lots of people live in the area, but in order to live there, you got to be able to afford the rent, you afford a mortgage, and the jobs you need to have to afford to live in Cook Street Village are more than just what the hospitality industry has to offer, sometimes more than what any trade has to offer. I know people who are in trades, who are electricians, who work in Victoria and have to move further than Souk to be able to afford it. And they're electricians. They're making really good money. Yeah, it's tough. So I know we keep talking about different parts of town. Maybe some of our listeners aren't from Victoria, but Cook Street Village is beautiful. Such a nice place to live, work, and play. But if you can't afford to, then you just eat there.
Yeah.
You're priced out of town.
Right.
And it's a problem for people like, tradespeople who have a good wage, and they're spending a lot of time in their car. They're contributing to traffic congestion, and this is not their fault, of course. They're just priced out of the city, greenhouse gas emissions. But I really feel for the people with the lower incomes towards the sort of the minimum wage and living wage end of the spectrum, because if they're out in Souk or beyond or up in Duncan and they're driving, that's an average cost of about $10,000 a year to run a car.
Yeah, it's
right.
crazy.
And that's an economical car. That's not a big fancy car.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of their wage.
Yeah. Well, and it's when you even look at the housing component of it, back in the day, it was like 30% of your income should go to housing. Now we're looking at 60%, 50 and 60% of incomes going to housing. And then you do the vehicle component. How do they ever get ahead? And never mind to ever enter the market, because we also hear about people saying it's not a right to own a house or what have you. But I think it's a human right to have an accommodation, I believe. A shelter that provides running water and safety, protection from the elements, all those things is a human right. And any civilized society should be trying to have people housed. And that should continue all the way through from, the people who are living on the street currently to, every socioeconomic category in my mind, and it doesn't mean everybody has to live in a single family home, or a right to a palatial space or anything like that. But you need to have a right to be housed. And if you're trying to, build a community, and you can't have people that can afford to live in it, like, where do you go from there?
Yeah. We need to take the human right to housing seriously, I think. And it's not just for the respecting the rights of those individuals who need to be housed, but in terms of the cost to society of having people unhoused. Like it's
well, hospital, like healthcare,
Yeah.
policing, like all the way through it. I mean, in my view, there's enough money to make it work. It's just directing it in the right way. Because I think housing, especially when you talk about the opioid crisis and mental health issues and trauma, which is the bulk of the reason why people find themselves on the street, is a healthcare issue. That has been masked as a policing issue, and doing something about it should be a part of our constitution. The federal government should enact a state of emergency and just start trying to drive some of these factors, that whether it's capacity or investing in mental health and opioid addiction, like real action that has the positive outcomes. So the city, now when we're running for city council, obviously the city council has some levers that we talked about earlier, or mechanism. How do you see your role in the city council having some influence in some of these stuff? Like, how do we get traction?
Yeah. Well, we need to take action, as you pointed out, sort of across the whole spectrum of housing. So let's start at the bottom end in terms of cost to people. The supportive housing that we need, the kind of housing that we need to bring people out of homelessness and prevent people from sliding into homelessness. Because sliding into homelessness is often the first step towards having other social problems for that person and health problems for that person that can lead to sort of chronic homelessness. Yeah. So we need to break that cycle of people falling into homelessness. So the city council this past year passed the Rapid Deployment of Affordable Housing Initiative. So I think that the next council is going to need to make sure that that's being implemented and that we're actually getting results. Because it's one thing to pass a policy and feel good about it and give ourselves a pat on the back, but we actually need to see more of those housing types being brought forward in applications and more of them being approved. And so I'm going to want to see reporting on what the metrics are for that. And if we need to make some changes, we need to dial it up a bit, then we need to dial it up a bit. So we need to keep our eye on that ball. The city, as you pointed out, doesn't have all the levers, but we can make it easier also at the next level of housing. And we can make it easier to pull federal and provincial money in. So whether it's co-ops or housing that's owned by nonprofits or public housing, we can show provincial and federal governments that we're willing to have more housing here, and not just in Victoria, but hopefully throughout the region. We're going to need to work with our neighboring municipalities and with the CRD, and really show that we're ready to approve that housing. And then I think we'll see some of those federal and provincial dollars, which are coming, start to flow towards us. The city also has a lot more power when it comes to market housing. So we've got the big levers of zoning and development permits and building permits, things that can be issued a lot quicker. We can also make it a lot more certain that certain types of housing will be built. Yeah. So we can put a priority on cooperative housing in terms of processing. Yeah. And I know that city staff do already, when they see a nonprofit housing proposal come in, they drop everything to focus on that. Yeah. I think city staff do a great job. They probably need a little more support at the council table for making sure that happens.
Like less debate, less
less politicization of it. So I think it's really important to have community engagement and community input. I don't think that the mechanisms we've got for those are ideal. Like we're mainly using public hearings, which is Thursday evenings, and there's a lot of young families with little kids who can't come to those. There's a lot of service sector workers who are having to work evenings, or people who are having to work 2 jobs just because their wages aren't high enough, and they can't come to those hearings. So we need to do a lot.
Young families and
too, people are busy. Yeah. So we need to spread that out. Now, just on that point, my own community association, Fairfield Gonzales Community Association, I sit on the CALAC committee there. That's the Community Association Land Use Committee. So we hear hearings of development proposals coming through before they get to City Council. And we put in place a few things to try to make it a little fairer, try to get a broader range of voices in. So we've been looking at holding some weekend hearings in addition to the evening 7 p.m. hearings that we hold. We've video recorded the different hearings, and we're inviting people to review those video recordings. We're putting them online, inviting people to send in emails. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can get a broader range of public input. And I think City Council needs to be experimenting with that too.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I know I was talking to a councillor out in Colwood who was trying to do the same thing. They were saying that their public hearings are at like 6 or 6:30.
Yeah.
That's when people are like trying to get their kids down to sit down and eat, and they're driving to soccer. They're doing all the things that they do in their life.
Yeah.
So
that's
it is important, I guess, everywhere to get more input and making it more accessible for the people.
Yeah.
When we need more housing, we talk about council, we talk about the province, we talk about the federal government. I don't see this only because my eyes aren't looking maybe, but I don't see any of them building houses. I see developers building houses, and I see individuals building houses. Is that where we need to get the push? Do we need more developers to put forward better plans for more affordable housing? And can we control that, or are we at the beck and mercy of developers and we have to let them build whatever they want because that's all they're proposing that they want to build? Or can we put some sort of guideline on any proposal? So if you're going to propose anything to Victoria, it needs to fit this kind of model.
Mm-hmm. A lot of good ideas there. I mean, I think first off, there's a lot of cities around the world that have had success with buying up property and the city being the developer. Mm-hmm. So, and of course the city doesn't have all the trades, but they contract it out. But they will look at the parcels and look at the city's housing objectives and acquire the land and hire builders and get the projects built. So I think we should be looking into sort of expanding that, but also, as you were saying, providing guidance. So there are cities that have sort of pre-approved specific types of projects. So, have a design competition, approve a fourplex or a number of designs for different fourplexes that could fit on suitable sized lots in Victoria, and say, this is pre-approved. So we're gonna look in to make sure that it fits within the neighborhood, but we're gonna make it really easy to build this specific type of housing. So I think we need to be a little creative like that. We need to look elsewhere, and we need to be looking forward and not just looking at our history. And it's a beautiful city, and we want to keep what's best in it, but we also want to kind of move forward and make sure that workers and families can be housed. So yeah, let's get creative about how we can make it easier for builders and families to build. The thing about developers is that part of their business model is this rezoning process.
Yes.
And they're good at it. They know how to navigate that. Builders maybe not so familiar with it. So if you take an initiative like the Missing Middle Housing Initiative, the aim there is to rezone some of the properties so that we can have duplexes built and not just single-family homes. If you do that pre-zoning, you can actually, if your objective is to cut out those evil developers.
Yeah, that's how you do it.
That's what you do. Then you've got families building homes, and friend groups might be building. Yeah. Like you get a few friends together to put up a fourplex. You hire builders instead of developers. So
yeah. Well, that's where I have a very good friend who's a developer. He's also spent some time on land use committees and what have you. And he said the idea that the Missing Middle Initiative is a windfall for developers is BS, because the developers make all their money on the rezoning. That's where they make the bulk of their effort is there, and also the reward is there. So if you remove the rezoning component of it, You know, they're basically just builders who are hammering sticks together, which it takes a very specific, and their margins aren't that big. I mean, you're looking at construction companies on 15% margins or 10% profitability or what have you, cost plus. So they're not, nobody's making, you know, if you remove the developer, nobody's making a big windfall with the missing middle. And again, we talk about wedge issues and trying to, you know, bring up the temperature for your base. These are the languages. And in my opinion, we just got to remove all that BS because, or at least call it out for what it is. So when somebody says, oh, the developers are going to be making all the, it's a windfall for developers. It's just, it's a lie.
Yeah,
right?
The current system is a windfall for developers.
Yeah, that's why it's been built this way. We got here for a reason.
Yeah.
And when you have, you know, 70% of your community, you know, designated single family, and you know, for me personally, you know, we bought a triplex in 2008 to live. So it was my wife at the time, Joe Zambri and Peter Zambri. We got together, just like you talked about, a family, you know, that we're going to buy, and it looked like a triplex. It smelled like a triplex, but, and it was in a duplex, triplex zoned area, or duplex zoned area anyways on Princess. But because it wasn't it was somebody had downzoned it to single family. It was functionally 3 suites. The current owner who we bought it off, who had owned it for 8 or 9 years, wasn't running it as a triplex. They're basically having it as a single family. So the mother lived in part of it and the daughter, but they didn't rent out any of it. And they said because it wasn't legal. So I was there. I'm like, okay, let me go talk to the city. And sure enough, it wasn't legal. It was on the list of, you know, where the bylaw was going to go do it. But they told me that bylaw is not enforcing this type of stuff. So I went and just converted it to a triplex. And Joe and I lived on the top floor. Pete lived with his partner on the middle floor. And then we rented out the basement. We made it a proper triplex. How much capacity can you imagine is available just in that scenario where the person that owns it is like, oh, I can't rent it out because it's against the law or against the bylaw or potentially breaching something. So they're
freeing that up.
Yeah, it's like free up. That seems like a very simple thing to do on the council table as far as like freeing up the idea that these suites are illegal.
Exactly.
Non-conforming, but...
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just the missing middle. So the missing middle is where you're knocking down an old house that's at the end of its life, and then what are you putting up after? Are you putting up a single family, or are you putting up a multi? But it's also the house conversion regulations. So we have these in Victoria, and we've had them since the 1950s. And they've been really great in places like Fairfield and Rockland, where you see these beautiful old places that have been preserved because we allowed them to be divided up into different units, and they became more economically viable.
Yeah.
If you've got a big old house and it's restricted to single family, people look at it as, well, okay, that's kind of financially not viable, and most likely it's going to be under-maintained and eventually knocked down as it tends to age. But with the home conversion regulation, we got a lot of housing units in these beautiful old places, and they're preserved, and they've preserved the character of the neighborhood. The city updated the house conversion regulations to say anything older than 1984, I believe it was. I'm not seeing a really great rationale for why we have a particular year. I think we should just allow that for all homes. As long as the lot is able to sustain more households. I mean, I would love to have the opportunity to put a second floor on our bungalow and rent that out. It may be to my kids for a while. Then hopefully they'll be able to find their own places. And, you know, when I look at my lot, standard lot, 5,000 square feet, I'm thinking it now houses one family. It could easily house 3, maybe even 4 families if we designed it well. So, and the nice thing about the house conversions is you don't have this knocking it down and rebuilding cycle, which has a lot of waste associated with it.
Environmental impact.
Exactly, and greenhouse gas emissions. You can stay on the same footprint, build up a little bit, redevelop the basement maybe into 2 suites. And as I say, you've got those. We're in a housing crisis. We need to be creative about how we help people move through instead of getting in their way.
Yeah.
So that's another piece of the housing puzzle. The thing about missing middle is it really is taking up all the air in the room, and making it hard to talk about the other pieces of the housing puzzle that we need to move forward with.
Well, the more obvious stuff, like you just mentioned, I mean, it's within our existing guidelines and codes to do. Let's put some attention, make some tweaks, obviously. I think you should be constantly tweaking and adjusting based on what the outcome looks like. And that goes to the bike lanes. It goes to everything. You know, when you get into a debate about whether what's right or wrong, or undoing something that was done, or you can't. And again, looking forward is always the better way than going back and seeing, okay, here's where we are today. How does it apply, and how's it being used? And what are the issues? Like, is it the Johnson Street Bridge intersection that needs to be adjusted, or the timing of the lights, or communication, or somehow? Great, let's do that.
Yeah.
But the idea of talking about ripping out the bike lanes as an example, or the missing middle, like, oh, it's this, and this is what's going to happen. And the idea, and this is what's laughable about it, is the idea that this is going to do anything in the short term is ridiculous. There's nothing is going to change. Just like in the, going back to the inclusionary housing policy in 2019, and that was something the city was able to do. Part of that is they asked the developers, if you're going to build a 60-unit rental, you need to provide 20% low income or market, I guess, or affordable
below
housing,
market,
right below market. And guess what happened? Nobody built anything.
Yeah.
So it's great. And when the other component, which I want to address a little bit and get your feedback on, is the consultation part of it, where I had some friends of mine that were in the consultation phase, and they all said, rather than making this like this random 20%, that also gets affected with inflation and housing prices as the project gets rolled out. So if it takes 2 or 3 years to build, what at the beginning is valued at X is valued at Y at the end. So all of a sudden now you look at where this project's going to actually hit, get to this, the occupancy, the values don't make sense, so they don't build it. And all the people that were in the housing associations and these nonprofits were saying, why don't you just tax them at a value at the beginning? That's part of the building process, permitting process, and say, okay, well, you're going to have to do $5,000 a door that goes to housing, and let the nonprofits fund an actual purpose-built nonprofit housing or co-op housing or what have you with those funds. And then it puts it in today's dollars for the developer. And then they don't have to worry about the risk, of a project that takes, 2 years in planning and then 2 years to build. And now they're having to have market rents at 20%. And then all this stuff is scattered, where you can actually find a location and have the these enterprises that are there just purposely to build these things, which I think would, what seemed like, even when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's good. But if you see, okay, how does that translate into action? And since 2019, none have been built. So that could be, it's a short window, but that could be an indicator of some kind. Right?
Yeah, we need to be able to make adjustments and do experiments and pilot things that may not work out. But we need to be able to feel like we're confident enough as a city. We're kind of growing up from being a town into being a city, and we've got some city problems. And I think we need to be experimenting. So if we're not getting enough included housing in those inclusionary projects, then we need to say, okay, what changes do we need to make to make this happen? Like, do we dial it down to 15%, or do we try to bring in some provincial and federal dollars to match? Or do we allocate some of our incremental tax revenues? So if we're building more density, more units in the city, we're increasing our tax base, right? The number of units that you're taxing. We don't have to, so we'll get extra revenue from that without increasing tax rates.
Yeah.
So let's take a portion of that tax increment and put it into affordable housing. So borrow against it, use the municipal financing authority, ask the provincial government if they can get us a better interest rate through their borrowing powers.
Or guaranteed loans and whatever, right?
Lots of ways we need to look at that financing, because we've got the revenue from future projects and future density increases. Let's get creative about how we can put it into building more of that housing. And then you mentioned the bike lanes, and of course we have to talk about that.
Yeah, of course.
So juicy political topic. It's funny because I worked for years in the environmental movement trying to raise the profile of transportation alternatives that were lower impact on the environment. And in Victoria, it seems to be like the number one political issue for people. So it's quite funny to see that. I get how people are affected by it. I mean, I used to take Richardson. Richardson was my go-to driving route. I would cycle it once in a while too, but it was my go-to driving route downtown. I could get downtown with no red lights.
Yeah, it's very quick.
And it's changed now, and so now I have to take Pandora and Yates, which costs me a couple of minutes. I mean, it's a pretty minor inconvenience, and I'm happy to do it if it makes people safer and makes them feel safer. But I think that we could do a better job of experimenting in that area as well. So when it comes to completing the rest of the cycling network, I look to places like Montreal and Vancouver, where they're much further ahead than we are. And just to take Vancouver, for instance, in some of their bike lanes, they just put down concrete flower planters every once in a while. And those provide the safety, they provide the separation from motor vehicle traffic. They're also adjustable, and you can build the network out much quicker.
Yeah.
So what if Victoria goes with a model like that, instead of taking 6 years to tear up the roads and pour concrete and do a massive public consultation? We've done quite a bit of consultation already, like years on the routes.
Yeah.
Let's try it out, put down some concrete planters, see how we're adjusted if we need to. Once we've optimized it, harden it a little bit with some concrete and make it more permanent. So I think, again, that's just another one of those areas
more
where
fluidity with it, rather than being so entrenched in.
It's the issue with the bike lanes now. I mean, I honestly, I don't really listen to a lot of news these days, so I might be out of touch, but it's the issue with the bike lanes now just coming from people who don't ride their bikes.
No, I think it's actually also people who do ride, but they're a different type of cyclists. So there's sport cyclists and recreational cyclists who primarily just want to get out to the regional trails and push hard.
Yeah,
right.
And sometimes drive their cars out to the regional trails, get the bikes off the back of the car and go for a ride. And there's people like me who ride and are comfortable riding in traffic, and have been riding in traffic for like 30 years. So those people aren't really the targets for those protected bike routes, and some of them don't like them, and some experienced cyclists who ride a lot don't like them. So it's a real mixed bag. But what heartens me is seeing a mom with 2 toddlers on the back of her cargo bike using those bike lanes, or 2 seniors riding side by side on their e-bikes, and I see a lot of that now.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's
really
who
prevalent.
this is for. And the city did some research asking people, okay, what would it take to make you ride on the bike lanes? And something like 60% of people said if it was safer, I would go out there and do it. And I think we're starting to see that now. That and e-bikes, which is another game changer. Lots of seniors out there on their e-bikes. Lots of just normal people who have a long commute, saving a lot of money by using their e-bikes. So if we can get our Victoria bike network completed and hooked up to the sort of other cities like Oak Bay, Saanich, and hooked up nicely to the regional trails, I think we could make a real dent in our transportation greenhouse gas emissions.
Do we need to make them safer? I mean, are they not green and independent of the road? And I look at them, I look at all the work, all the planning, all the effort, all the complaining, all the bolstering of the bike lanes. I'm really pro bike lane myself. I love them. I don't find them unsafe. I probably
misspoke. I meant the routes that people take need to be safer. Yeah, and that's the building out the network versus looking at a couple of routes going east-west to go downtown. But actually, now that you mention it, with the increase in e-bikes and the use of mobility scooters in the bike and roll lanes, which I wholeheartely support.
Oh, for sure.
Some of those lanes are actually starting to look a little narrow already.
Yeah.
Even just a few years after they were designed, some of them are quite narrow, some of them are quite bendy, like down on Wharf Street, some parts of Pandora, you know,
There's capacity issues there too.
There's capacity issues. Now, if we had built those with the concrete planters,
Yeah,
here's our
you
2020 hindsight,
Exactly.
right? And we needed to adjust it, we could, but it's kind of locked in concrete right now. So yeah, let's.
Adding more capacity would help.
Yep.
You know, but again, it's
Yep.
the same thing with like we built all our road systems around a vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So now, as you know, vehicles, you know, multimodal transportation becomes more active transportation becomes more of a real thing. Then you know, focusing on how to look forward 20 years to what it's going to be. And
Yeah, exactly.
I agree. Rather than making it like you build these concrete permanent structures that with rebar, and then you end up having to where you're going to rip them out and then rebuild it. Like it doesn't make a lot of sense to do it.
Yeah, I think we got to focus on moving forward, not looking back, and complete the rest of the network in a way that looks good. And when it comes to transportation, also transit, super important.
Yes.
You know, not everybody can ride a bike, not everybody can drive a car or even own a car. A lot of people can't. So we need to make the transit system a lot better too. Now that's again a provincial area, right? When it comes to service levels, so the number of buses, the number of drivers, the number of hours that a bus is in service is a provincial decision. The province has created a goal of reducing vehicle kilometers traveled by 25% by 2030. So that's what they're saying is we want to see a lot less cars on the road. So that's a provincial level goal. Municipalities and provincial government are going to need to work together to achieve that. So what the city of Victoria could do to make transit better and give people a better alternative, because let's face it, right now, transit is pretty limited to people who live along a good bus route and or have a lot of time that they can devote to waiting. The transit app that shows real-time locations of buses is obviously a big help. But what we need to do is get the buses moving quicker through traffic. So, and municipalities can do a little bit. We can give buses signal priority. So I saw this in other cities I've lived in 20, 30 years ago. You would have a different symbol on the light stack that showed that buses could go, and they'd get a 10-second head start over the cars. So they could get to the next bus stop quicker without being blocked by traffic. There's little bulges that we can put in sidewalks that stick out where the bus pulls up, instead of having the bus pull in and get blocked by traffic. There's rapid bus lanes, so we're painfully slowly building out a rapid bus system. Again, I think we should look to those quick build techniques, those experimental techniques, to try to do that much quicker. Get the rapid bus network built out much quicker. Help people commute in from further out with much less time spent in their car, much less traffic congestion. So again, we need to be looking at doing things differently, and trying new things, and being aware that times are changing and that the city changes. It's always changed, right? You go back a couple hundred years, there was no city.
That's right.
In most of Victoria, and who's to say that what we built in the time when my house was built, like 1959, is the perfect Victoria, right? It is going to change whether we want it to or not. We just have to sort of make sure that it changes in a good way, good way that makes more people happy, that accommodates more people, and keeps the beauty, the natural beauty that surrounds Victoria as well.
Right.
So
we've talked about some great ideas that could be really helpful for Victorians. These can't be new ideas. People have thought about these or other really good ideas in the past, and people get on council, and all of a sudden these things aren't happening. These good ideas seem to be talked about a lot, but when it comes to actually putting them out there and the governance of the council, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect. Can you maybe talk about how you would do things a little differently when you're in council?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that my background and my work advising organizations on governance is going to help here, because that's what I do for my consulting business. And what I bring to organizations that I do this work for is, let's identify your goals. What kind of outcomes, what kind of results do you want? And then we work backwards from there. So what kind of systems do you need to put in place? Okay, you need a good system where your board of directors is focused on the sort of horizon, focused on the trends, focused on stakeholder input, and you've properly delegated to staff the implementation and management and the sort of need to achieve those outcomes. And you're evaluating staff based on their successful performance of that. I think we need to bring that kind of approach to City Council. So I think we need a lot less of the sort of grandstanding and speech making and delving into what staff are supposed to be responsible for. And
well, those staff are professionals. Like
they're professionals.
And
they know what
they're doing. There's also, even when it comes to the building part of it, now, back in the day when I used to do some development type stuff myself, we could literally hand draw what we're building. Like literally, it wasn't that bad, but it was pretty close. Where you're drawing it on a napkin and you bring it to, can I do this?
I've done that.
And they're like, measurements, just okay, literally. Pencil in this and put this measurement there, and you're good. Perfect. I'll photocopy it and we're good to go. Now you've got to use an architect, you've got to use an engineer. All these things that should have sped it up, because now because it's also, there's a liability component of it too, right? And you want to make sure there's compliance with building codes and all that stuff. Now the expense on even the average homeowner to do any type of building permitting is, it's added probably 10 or 15% to whatever the cost is. And you're using these professionals that have insurance. They're regulated by their governing body and all this stuff. That should free things up.
You would think, I mean,
but it's the opposite effect. It seems to have slowed it down.
Yeah. I think we've been kind of trying to cut expenditures within government, and we're wanting to cut the fat, but we're now cutting the muscle and the bone.
Yeah. We can relate to
that. So it's turned into this situation where we've outsourced so much of city work to the private sector, including the developers and builders and homeowners who want changes, that it's adding huge costs to them.
Yeah.
I think a little more funding, honestly, to the development staff and approval staff to catch up on our backlog, and then shorten all those processing times, because housing delayed is housing denied, basically. And if we're saying, okay, it's going to take 2 years. Not only is that going to delay the ones that do proceed, but there's going to be a lot who say, I'm just not going to proceed. And I've talked to a lot of people who've wanted to do something like a garden suite, or a renovation to suite their basement. And I've talked to a lot of people over the last 6 months, 12 months on the doorstep, and they've heard the horror stories about their neighbors who spent $300,000 to build a 400 square foot garden suite that's going to house exactly one person. And they just say, I'm just not going to do that.
Yeah.
So I think the city needs to actually invest in keeping a proper staff contingent. And also, I think we have to get back to City Council. It needs to actually stop interfering with proper staff processing of this stuff. They are professionals. They do know what they're doing. We do need to evaluate. This is not saying carte blanche, city staff, do whatever you want. We need to set their goals and tell them the policy parameters that they work within, and then evaluate them on their success in doing it.
Like the policies, and like you've got the OCPs, and you've got, if it fits within those categories, like to me, what are we talking about? Well, then it becomes you're relying on the architects and the designers, which you will have to have in order to even make the application. So to me, it should just pretty much be a rubber stamp if it fits within those. Obviously, if you're asking for variances and different other relief from the existing bylaws, then sure, take more time. But you should be able to fast track all that stuff.
And we should be able to streamline that. Like we passed an official community plan 10 years ago. And we never updated the zoning bylaw to reflect that OCP. So, I mean, thousands of individuals participated in that official community planning process. And the citizens were led by the city to believe, okay, I'm providing input here, and this is going to actually help to shape the future of my community. And then we just didn't do it. And we've got a bunch of other plans that City Council has adopted too, like the Greenways Plan. Again, adopted 20 years ago now, the Greenways Plan. And the idea was that on some of these quieter streets, we were going to have a network of kind of beautiful places where it feels safer.
Yeah.
People can walk, people can roll, people can ride. It'll be, green and lush. And we had a vision for it, and then it just was never implemented. So, I mean, I think that we need to go back to some of our, and maybe we need a bit of an audit of the various plans that the city has adopted over the last 20 years and say, where are we at in terms of progress on these? And if we don't want
relevant?
them, is it still relevant?
Is a 20-year-old plan or a 20-year-old vision something that we want
that's
right now?
The thing about the OCP is we need to, 10 years old, we need to be updating that. I think first of all, we need to update the zoning bylaw to reflect the OCP.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that we can say to homeowners and builders, hey, you're actually allowed to do all these things. So now go ahead and do it because it fits within the existing rules.
That's where I think the messaging, like if you picked, I don't know what the number is, if you picked like 2 or 3 things that are very quick, rapid, you do a campaign and promoting that this is how it actually works. So you remove all the myth, of this, it's a 5-year process and your $100,000 garden suite now is $400,000. Like you just say, here's how it's going to affect that.
Yeah.
You're still going to run into like constraints with building and things like that, but that's a way more manageable process if you're just waiting for a builder to show up versus, all these onerous rules and regulations that actually, if it fits into the zoning and it fits into the OCP, why aren't we doing it?
Yeah.
And again, that's measuring outcomes.
Yeah,
right?
Measuring outcomes. And let's do the consultation with nearby neighbors who are actually affected or could potentially be affected by these projects. But let's shorten the timeline for that too. Let's make that happen. Let's depoliticize it. Let's take the sort of divisive tribal politics out of some of this and have it done professionally and with quality public input that isn't biased or anything.
Well, I just want to talk just briefly about that because I've been involved in some public, especially when it came to the bike lanes through Cook Street Village and things like that. And they had a whole review process that then they wrote a report. The report was actually read. So they already had the public input. The report was already read. And then people that read the report that didn't participate in the public, meetings and input, now we're up in a, oh my God, what's going on? Demanding more input. So the city said, okay, let's talk about it again. And I was there. I remember standing up and listening to, while I was listening to it. And then I just stood up and said, what? You guys had all the opportunity prior to this report being written. The report was written and you didn't like it based on the public input. Then now we're having another meeting to talk about it. Like it needs to stop at some point. You need to, but you also actually have to listen to the input.
You do.
So if the city has here's what we want, and the prime example is Net Zero Victoria, and they got a bunch of people together, the stakeholders like restaurant owners, and I was involved in that Zoom call, and a few other of our bread and butter collective members, and talking about a cup fee. They're talking implementing a cup fee, and everybody was uniform in like that's just a dumb idea. Like, sure, do I want to get 30 cents for a cup that I don't have any obligation to do anything with? I mean, our businesses are carbon neutral anyways, but I'm like, let's focus on trying to make businesses carbon neutral rather than this kind of virtue signaling 30-cent cup fee, which is basically a tax, which is just going to go to the owners of the hospitality businesses and nothing to do to help the environment. So we like, okay, our input's in. And then they come out and say, yeah, looks like we're going to look at the 30-cent cup fee. And I'm like,
what?
What the hell? Like, who'd you consult with? Was there something I missed? Like, this is not what we,
Yeah.
Similar to the inclusionary housing component where the people that were, in the nonprofits were like, just give us the money and we'll build it. We'll actually build a purpose built, not spread out all these low income housing all across the city that doesn't actually get low income people housed. So again, like if you're going to do the public, you're representing the constituents, right?
Yeah, and we do need to listen to that input, and then I think we need to be, if we're really transparent about our public engagement, and we've got decent public engagement processes where we know we're not hitting a sort of a biased, self-selected segment of the population, we're reaching all of the population, then I think we need to be firm about, okay, we actually did the consultation. So just this past spring, there was another example of this on Missing Middle. 2 years of public engagement, and this is a governance problem too. There's a bit of a crossover here. City Council comes in and says, well, actually, we're going to have one more little engagement session this summer. So they, instead of making a decision in the spring based on the input that they'd had, they created another sort of hearing opportunity in the middle of the summer, which ended up being incredibly divisive. And you had people swearing at each other.
It was toxic.
And people, it didn't, as far as I could see, and I attended sessions and listened to them online when I wasn't able to attend. I didn't hear any new ideas coming out of that or new information that hadn't already been
addressed.
Exactly. In 2 years of consultation, it's very unlikely that City Council is going to design a better process on the spur of the moment, basically during a council meeting, and have it end up being better. So again, it's a governance problem. We need to do the engagement better. We need to be transparent about it. We need to listen to people, have the opportunity to change things based on the input that we do receive, and then say, actually, we're done now.
Yeah, exactly.
And
we
need to move forward.
We're done.
There needs to be an end.
Yeah, we don't. But it's politicized, and I get that certain city councilors were, thinking about re-election. Now, I think a few of them have since decided I'm not going to seek re-election because I'm probably not going to win. There's a bit of political gamesmanship there, which is why we need to kind of automate some of these processes and not have it always coming back to political votes at city council. So I'm fully in favor of having public hearings, fully in favor of having better engagement processes. But then we do need to draw the line and move forward, frankly.
How do you see the composition? Because people talk about slates and they talk about this and that, and obviously based on the impression of the last council or the last couple of councils, and they talk about Together Victoria, and they're like, oh, we can't have Together Victoria. I am a firm believer that you need just like a board of directors, you need people with a variety of experiences and knowledge bases, and you also need to have voices at the table that are maybe not in the super mainstream. For example, like you've got your right and you've got your left, and the further you divert from that, they kind of meet in the middle. And it doesn't make for good. It'd be great if everybody agrees, right? But I think that citizens need to know that their voice is being heard, even if it isn't something that will get implemented or what have you. But if there's a councillor that represents, sort of like policing and, we need to lock up all the homeless people or whatever, I think, in order for the community to get behind the council, they need to know that, every voice is being represented to some degree, not necessarily in the actual outcome of the policy, but how do you see the makeup of, do you view it because you've dealt with nonprofits, you've dealt with, advising, organizations. So how do you see, what does the perfect council table look like for you?
Me and 8 clones of me.
Okay.
The interview is over.
Together, Dave.
Dave.
We need to.
Dave.
Dave. All of us. There are a lot of Daves. I do like diversity in group decision making, because you do need to bring in those different perspectives, and it's not just the public engagement but the actual people at the table. They bring different skills to the table.
Yeah.
So I may be really good on law and economics and governance and that sort of thing, but somebody is going to bring in more of an arts focus, and we need that.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to bring in more of a focus on homelessness and the downtown and drug toxicity problem. So there's going to be a lot of different voices on council, I think, this time around, bringing in and a lot of fresh blood, right?
Yeah.
We've got 7 vacancies at least,
Yeah.
and possibly more depending on who wins and who loses. This is complicated by the history of slates in Victoria. So we did have new council a few elections back. That was Stephen Hammond running for mayor and Stephen Andrew running for councillor on a slate. And then we had Together Victoria on the left side. New council was on the right. Together Victoria's on the left. We've got a far right slate running right now.
Yes.
Mainly focused on the school board, and I won't get into that. But I think you're right that a lot of people don't like slates. And I get asked on the doorstep, are you running independently? And I've been clear from day one that it's an independent run.
Yeah.
There are people running for council that I can see agreeing with on various different issues. Like I know a couple of people who I agree with pretty strongly on their housing policy. Another person clearly aligned on climate change policy. Another person on homelessness and that sort of thing. So you'll see overlapping groups. I've been asked, aren't you part of Together Victoria? And of course I'm not. You really need to know something more about Together Victoria if you think that I'm a Together Victoria candidate. I don't look like a Together Victoria candidate. But there are these overlapping viewpoints. And so, yes, I share the views of some of the people who used to run for Together Victoria, which no longer exists. Yeah. But I also share the views of some of those other people that you've mentioned too, that have quite different political orientations. And I think that's the nice thing about a mixed council, is that we will have areas where we can reach agreement, and we'll have areas where we won't reach agreement, where we will continue to disagree, and that's a constructive process. Disagreement.
Well, compromise.
Compromise, right? And it's educational, it's informative. Yeah. I think it results in better decision making. So that's partly also my background as a lawyer, like the way that courts find truth and make decisions is by having radically different perspectives on the same set of facts and bringing forward the different pieces of evidence that contribute to a whole story, and then the judge is there saying, okay, I've got the whole story from both sides, instead of just hearing from one side.
Well, it's like an really echo chamber.
Yeah, exactly. And then we get back to that divisive politics. So I think it's good to have a bit of diversity.
Is there a difference between diversity in the court system and diversity in a council where there isn't a judge? There's only someone who is the mayor, but there are only one seat on council. There's no one taking the place of the judge on council saying, okay, I've heard everything. I've heard both sides or all sides, and now here's what we need to do. There's no one saying that. So
you're right.
Is there a difference between the judicial system
there is a structural difference. And you're quite right to point out that the mayor only has one vote. We have a weak mayor system, which is, I think, a really good thing. But I think that the judge is going to be the majority vote that you can get on council. Okay. And so what we really need from a mayor and from councillors is people who can actually work collaboratively. Yes. So enough of the sort of, making big political speeches and saying, look at me, I'm saving everybody, and, waving the flag. What we're going to need is people who can actually say, okay, I want to find at least 5 votes on this council to move something forward. Yeah. If we've got very diverse views on council, that'll be good. You'll need to work with other people and demonstrate that you can, and hopefully we can work towards consensus on some of the issues. And consensus can be unanimity, or it can be slightly less than unanimity, but we need to make the effort to try for that. So I think that the judge is the group, and they're looking at the public. Is the public going to be happy with this? Because after all, they're politicians, right? And so, Yeah, different structure, but I think the same result. You need to bring in all the different views in order to make the best decision.
Right. And when I hear you talking about how council works, how the government works, I think of a few things. I think really we're talking about this in the same terms as we talk about the back end of our businesses. We look out 10 years into the future. We paint a picture of our vision and those are the public consultations, right? We think in terms of 10-year plans, 5-year plans, and we put our vision out there, but then we need people to implement it. And the same people who are coming up with the vision aren't the same people who are implementing it. And now all of a sudden I'm hearing you saying we're consulting with the public as a council. The council comes up with the vision and then the staff are your implementers. For my staff, if it's a project that's under $1,000, say, they have carte blanche to just go do it. They don't need to come and talk to me. So in terms of housing, any kind of thing that the staff is able to do that they feel that they can't do without going back to council, is there a way to bridge that gap, say, and give staff the autonomy to work within the system freely? So they can just go do things, and because that is what they do. They're the experts at doing things. Council is the experts of coming together, gathering the information, coming up with the vision and proposing it, and then making the staff work at that. Is that
yeah,
correct?
that's to me. You've described good governance in your organization. Basically saying to staff, you know the direction that we want to go. So we do that at the city council table too. We should be passing a strategic plan that is actually strategic and not kind of all over the place, but one where you can actually tell where we want to go and staff can tell where we want to go. Then we define the policies that staff need to stay within. So within the back end of your business, you were saying spending up to $1,000. Well, we set a bunch of different parameters for staff at the city level, and then they go away and do that stuff. And we check in. We check in every month. We check in every 6 months. We do a formal review every year. How are we doing on achieving the goals and getting the results that are specified in our strategic plan? And we evaluate. And we evaluate the city manager on that because we have one employee, the council. That's the city manager. And then the city manager supervises everybody else. And, if this department isn't achieving its outcomes, it's up to the city manager to manage that, and not for council to dive in there and start cross-examining individual staffers.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Which has happened.
Oh, which has happened, and it's such bad governance. It just shows, it looks amateurish.
And it's sort of the starting point, I would say, for the new council. It's to start with that level of implementation as far as, okay, here's how I guess it comes down to the mayor setting that as an agenda item for the incoming council. It's to say, we need to improve governance, and this is kind of how we are going to do it. Let's pick our topics. And
we might want to strike a governance committee.
Yes.
So this is one of the things that I often recommend to organizations when we're working through this is let's have a governance committee who is fully responsible for bringing, not for all of the governance that happens, but for the governance training and for monitoring our governance performance. So the city hasn't been using topic-specific committees. It's been using committee of the whole for everything.
Yes. Yeah.
So committee of the whole is just basically council sitting down at 9 a.m. On a Thursday saying we're committee of the whole, and then sitting down later in the day and saying we're actually council. It's the same people. But we may want to look at some functionally specialized committees. So maybe a finance committee. I know that this has already been discussed in council, and it's been found problematic to have these theme-based committees. But I think for governance, we may want to do it because I can tell you, based on having done the training and workshops over the years, being taught about governance once and then saying, okay, now go off and do your thing isn't enough.
No,
like
it's constant.
Yeah, it's constant, and there needs to be a focus on it at the table, and not just from the mayor. It has to be from, all council members have to be working towards this.
Yeah, I like to hear that. Okay, in closing, what do you want to leave our listeners with? Dave Thompson, City Council.
Vote for all the Daves.
These are the Daves I know.
Exactly. I would say do your research on the candidates. There's a very big field. Okay, the city has a website where it has every candidate giving 150 words of a description about themselves. Think about what you want as citizens for the future of your city. If you want a sort of a housing friendly, where we're welcoming new people, if we want to provide housing that's affordable, if we want climate action, if we want a clean environment, we want some actual policies that are and programs that are actually going to make the downtown nicer.
Yeah.
We didn't get a chance to talk about that, but we should. Maybe the next time I'm on.
Yes, we'll have you back for sure.
Yeah.
Well, the concrete planters will be full of beautiful flowers.
Exactly. Well, no, we do need to beautify the city. Like it does.
100%.
It does need to be nice looking downtown to keep the tourists coming in. But do your research on the different candidates. There's an awful lot of them. Also, just talk to your friends. Find out who are they voting for.
Yeah.
Are there lists of candidates who are good on these issues or good on those issues? And it's an election this time that I think is going to make a big difference. And this is what I'm hearing from a lot of people at the doorstep as well as in private meetings, is in previous elections there hasn't been too much of a difference. But going forward on this election, there are some very clear choices.
Yes, for sure.
And the city is going to go in quite different directions depending on who gets elected. So please vote. That would be my final request for voters is vote, and please tell your friends and family and colleagues to vote.
100%. Let's get the vote out.
Vote and vote more often.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no, vote once.
Yeah.
Make sure you do it.
Vote early.
Vote early.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Awesome, Dave. Thank you for your time. I loved your
thanks
perspective.
very much.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
I really
It's great.
enjoyed it, guys.
And
Good conversation.
I think you'll make a great addition to the city council.
Well, thank you. I hope to do so.
Right on. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Kaylin, another spectacular podcast.
Yes, really informative. I feel smarter for having, spoken with Dave. So
Yeah, me too. I learned lots about how things work or how things ought to maybe work. It reminded me a lot of just thinking about my own business.
well, you just go back to basics.
Yeah.
And when you deviate from the basics, that's when you kind of run into some problems. Let's get our form and shape back.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a soccer team.
Let's get some
you can't win if
structure.
you don't have structure.
Yeah.
As a starting point. And then, we already have some meat of the discussion, whether you talk about missing middle or, the bike lanes or beautification or, attracting, people to come live and work in our city.
Yeah.
Then, all that will just come from it. But let's
Well,
make sure outcomes.
Victoria is a beautiful city. I can't vote in Victoria, even though I own a few businesses here. That's my stickling point because I live in Machosen.
Machosen's lucky to have
If you own property here, you can vote here.
I know, but I don't. I'm just a business owner for 26 years. That's all.
Just.
That's all. I've got no say in the city.
All right. Thank you, guys.
If I
appreciate
did,
it.
though, Dave, you're on my list, buddy. Thanks a lot. Kaylin, have a great day. Be real nice, everyone.
Be kind.
I will. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bread and Butter Collective's membership includes the following local businesses: 2% Jazz, 900 Degrees Wood-Fired Pizzeria, Agrius, Big Wheel Burger, Blue Mountain Solutions, Bodega Tapas Wine Bar, Brentwood Bay Village Emporium, Nourish and Charlotte the Quail, Victoria Chocolate and Company, Drum Roaster Coffee, Habit Coffee, Foo Asian Street Food, the Culinary Arts Program at Camosun, Cafe Fantastico, Fall Epi, Harold Street Brewworks, Hey Happy, House of Botang, Hoyne Brewing, Jenny Marie's Cracker Company, La Pasta, La Rue Patisserie, Mocha House, Part and Parcel, Poco a Pinto Bar, Pizzeria Prima Strada, Rain Dogs, Roast, Table 9 Consulting, Sherwood Cafe and Bar, Sweets by Selena, The Collective Wine Bar and Kitchen, The Drake, Tapa Bar, Taco Stand Al Pastor, Took, The Whole Beast, The Wienery, and Zambries.
To hear more from the Bread and Butter Collective, go to checknews.ca/podcasts on Check Plus or find us on your favorite podcasting platform.